Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Adam Lyle. Have I got video? Yes, I do have video. Sorry. Welcome to Achieving Carbon Neutrality. One goal, many pathways. Many pathways is what we're very keen on doing here at Level 3 with Deloitte. This is the fourth in our series on sustainability. So very excited this afternoon to be focusing on carbon neutrality. I think, we're all very aware of, it seems like every day there's another headline, but I think we're also very focused on wanting to get below the headlines and get into the topics. And that's very much what I think we're going to do this afternoon. I'm delighted to be able to introduce Yvonne Zhang, who's going to be our moderator this afternoon. Yvonne is the lead and sustainability director, risk and advisory at Deloitte. She's going to be joined on the panel this afternoon with Tony Verb, co-founder of Carbonless Asia, and Eunice Yeo, Executive Director and Head of Greater China for our good friend EcoBusiness. Indeed, sustainability is very much at the core of what we do here at Level 3. It's one of our 5 important pillars. So we've done a lot of work over the last 4 years in sustainability. And I guess all of you who are listening, who are in this field, are most probably a bit like me, that, wow, it's now starting to get such focus this year. So I really think this is an important year, and we're seeing so much happening already, and we're only less than halfway through the year. For anyone who wants to catch up later, we are live on Facebook. But without further ado, I'm actually going to hand over to Yvonne to take it away.
Thank you, Adam. It's the second time I'm hosting an event with Level 3. And also sometimes, I do get very excited to see who shows up, because it's a very diverse range of audience, and we tend to receive all sorts of very strong opinions, as well as very exciting debates through the audience participation channel. So make sure that you shoot us all the difficult questions. Do not hold back. So today I'm joined by Eunice and Tony, and we're talking about one of the hottest topics, which is carbon. And we're not just talking about what if we take away all the carbon in the world. It's not realistic, right? We have to transition to a more livable future, and also we're focusing on carbon neutrality. So what carbon neutrality does is to offset unavoidable emissions in any given year with different types of efforts and also different types of instruments. So there are many ways to actually go towards that target. And I think there's a lot of talk about different types of technology, such as carbon removal, sequestration, blue carbon, sucking the carbon out of the air to make into diamonds, all sorts of things. And we need to land a critical lens on what is a credible solution, what are the high quality carbon credits companies should consider, what are the hallmarks of credible pathways to carbon neutrality versus other emerging trends that we can entertain, we can think about, and we can maybe contribute to, but also we need to be very cognizant of from its practical implications today. So I'm just moderating today, and this is the longest stretch of long sentences I'm going to utter. The limelight goes to Eunice from EcoBusiness and Tony from Carbonless Asia. And also the bigger limelight goes to the audience today. Shoot us questions from Q&A, send us messages, we'll address it. And also I wanted to make sure that we are as candid and as critical as possible, right? We are coming with the agenda to shed some light and shed some insight, and also to engage in the debate. So without much ado, I'd like to pass the baton to Eunice to have a quick introduction of her background.
Thank you, Yvonne. Really nice to meet everyone here. I can't really see you, but I assume that you're all very excited about the topic that we're going to have today on carbon. My name is Eunice, and I'm the Executive Director for EcoBusiness, as well as heading up the Greater China region. I'm based in Beijing, and it's really wonderful to be here, I guess, discussing a really important topic that I guess a lot of us have in our roles, respective roles in our jobs, I would say. So just very quickly about myself, I'm a trained sustainability professional. I've been in this line for more than 10 years, even though my career has spanned over about 17 years so far. I started out as a marketing and business individual, worked for government sectors and worked for private sectors, Half of it was based in China, and then the other half in Singapore. The last 10 years, I really managed to figure a way out to specialize in what I really believed in, which was how sustainability is at the crossroads with business and understanding business impacts. This is really important because I think business plays a very key role in ensuring that policy making goes as far as it can be, and also touching on lives in society as well. There is a lot to be said in terms of environmental impact, but the social impact, especially what we're seeing in the pandemic, is definitely something that cannot be negated as well. So Eco-Business, we cover news, media, anything around responsible business and sustainable development. This is where the crossroads of where a lot is happening, and we cover the stories for Asia Pacific. So really happy to say that, you know, we're leading this space. We're very uniquely placed, and looking forward to hearing more interactions from the people in the audience today. Thank you. Tony, over to you.
Thank you. I was waiting for my cue. So here we go. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you for Level 3 and Deloitte for having me here, and thank you for the audience. I also cannot see you, but I can feel your attention and indeed your excitement around this topic. Obviously, with Janice, we are very much following the news and writing the news and try to create news around decarbonization, Asia Pacific, and in my case also technology and innovation. And my very personal story about decarbonization, or that led me to decarbonization, is through indeed technology, innovation, the pursuit towards impact positive investments, and urbanization as a mega trend, which is obviously shaping the world, but even more importantly, shaping Asia Pacific, shaping our regions, shaping our cities. And when I say our cities, I am based in Hong Kong, Janice is in China, Beijing, and Yvonne is in Singapore. So it relates to all of us and all cities in between our cities, wherever you are, we are. And when I look deeply with the team, what impact in urbanization actually means and what we should focus on, we arrived to decarbonization as the singular metric that we wanted to focus. And as we dig even deeper, we also realized that in Asia Pacific, there was no dedicated investment fund or innovation platform that was fully focusing on this thesis. And there was a specific need around this. There was a global trend that locally has not been addressed. Locally, when I say locally, in Asia Pacific. And we decided to just do that. And when we started ideating around this seriously last year, in August, shortly after China, then Japan, South Korea, and Hong Kong announced their carbon neutral targets, and we knew we had to create a new platform. And when I talk about a platform, even though we are a venture capital-led and investment-led entity and organization, we also advise on specific transactions and deals, and we also work with big corporations around their decarbonization targets, initiatives, projects, and we are here to work basically with everyone out there, any stakeholder that share this focus or have resources that we don't have. Ultimately, we are here to be a catalyst led by capital allocation to this thesis, but also catalyzing innovation and technology that can contribute to the decarbonization of the cities of Asia Pacific. So this is in a nutshell. I'm very happy to be here once again, and I can't wait for the conversation to kick off and unfold.
Okay, all right, let's get started. So let's talk about this carbon concept as we see today. It's not new. This is round 3. First round, in the 1990s, US introduced one of the first power-related emission trading schemes. Second round, that's when I got into the market about 16 years ago, when the Clean Development Mechanism, CDM projects, became very actively being generated from this region, and then also traded against the EU mandatory cap and trade systems. So that was a spectacular boom in the excitement and the hopefulness of us finding a cure to do good, right? Using financial instruments to fix real world issues. I joined the commodities field specifically to actually look at whether we can embed the carbon price into many different types of commodities to see whether that can influence the trajectory of capitalism. We failed. Why? Because there was rampant amount of fraud. There was a lot of transparency issues on how the projects were performing. Were they high quality enough? Were there continuity? And also whether there is actual accountability, right, between the project, sponsor, operator, off-taker, and financier. We didn't find the right answer. So the third round is now. So the third round, we are seeing a tremendous amount of support because the country started to pledge, the industry started to pledge, the court started to rule in favor of the environment and stakeholders against the interests of the corporates. So we are in a much stronger position to make it work this time around. So I'm gonna kickstart some of the questions to the panel here. We learned the lessons. What are the things that you think we should be focusing on this round to get it right? This is round number 3. We're probably not gonna get round number 4 if we look at the trajectory of the environment. Eunice,
Tony?
wanna?
Sure.
You're too polite.
Okay, all right, ladies first then. So that's a very good question and a great way to start this. What do we need to get right this time? Just from a news angle, one of the things that I shared with Tony in our last panel discussion together was the fact that this has become such a paper chase. A lot of companies and countries today are making enormous claims around their carbon reduction targets. And this is actually very encouraging because a lot of them are doing this because they are being pressured by stakeholders, whether it's their customers themselves, whether it's government policy. But a very interesting trend that I see taking place in the last 5 years or so is the change in the way the finance sector is seeing carbon and seeing the ESG movement unfold. The whole time, I would say, I guess that the challenge has been is that there has never been a way to evaluate this into their balance sheets. It's still not watertight. And when you talk about ESG disclosures, it's a real challenging situation where there aren't any harmonization of standards. You look at one questionnaire and the other, the way they rank one single indicator, it can be so different. So how is it that we can get to a place where when we talk about decarbonization, there is one single standard? I think the good thing is that we're at least getting somewhere where it's becoming a mainstream conversation amongst businesses, be it very large multinationals or localized Asian firms that are supplying to these large firms. And I think the movement has started, and this movement we've not seen in round 1 or round 2, I would say. This is definitely something that's monumental, and it's making history. The other thing I would say, of course, is the SDGs, the 2030 targets that we're having, and the fact that Science-Based Targets Initiative, alongside the Task Force for Climate Financial Disclosure, TCFD, is really making movements such that it's integrating a lot of the calculations and a lot of the valuations into proper balance sheets, so that disclosures are now becoming a lot more watertight than it used to before. So I think basically that is changing the conversations. You're able to at least have that evaluated in the sense that the financiers and the modelers can put that into their risk analysis and I guess justify some of these investments or de-investments. So I guess these are the things that are markers to me that there is enough movement. But that said, I don't think we've addressed enough issues around transparency. There are still a lot of questions around the solutions. And I think in this aspect, perhaps Tony would have a better say in what he thinks. Over to you, Tony.
Thank you for the cue again. And the great insights, Janice. I obviously echo all of your observations and notes. I think the fact that under the Paris Agreement, reporting emissions is legally binding is an amazing start. So things are indeed different. And what needs to be in place, no matter what, is tight regulations and that actually contribute and force the various stakeholders for transparency. We also need to make sure there's no double counting when it comes to emissions and credits. We also need efficient systems where reporting, accounting, offsetting are reliable and efficient and fast and straightforward processes. And there are already some initiatives in place. But on your note, Janice, with regards to the movement has started. I think the fact that by now around 50%, I think we are getting beyond 50%, but around 50% of banks and asset managers have committed to decarbonize their portfolios is a big indicator that this is not an exotic conversation anymore. This is indeed mainstream, and it is happening. Thankfully, the market happens to have a self-fulfilling kind of spiral and dynamic around it. So whatever people believe will happen actually will happen because they start aligning their actions accordingly. And I'm more of a optimist, and I see in this whole process opportunities definitely now, and see the positives. And obviously there are a lot of observers out there that are complaining that only 50% of the banks and asset managers have committed to decarbonize their portfolios, but it's huge. And the other 50% will not be able to ignore these dynamics, these movements, because the pressure is there from policymakers, from the international community, from consumers, from business partners, across the board. So now actually institutional investors, even corporate stakeholders are overbidding each other how much they can decarbonize, how fast they can decarbonize, and not only scope 1, scope 2, but also scope 3 level. And that's great. And along these lines, and just on your last note, Janice, there has been a report, a data point that suggested that 46% of the technology that's needed to achieve net zero is already available. Another 50% is in development. So what we need is policies to pressure the various stakeholders and market players to adopt these technologies, and obviously then allocate and reallocate finances and investment to support the scale and the adoption of these technologies and the development of these technologies. And that's frankly exactly where we are as Carbonless Asia are trying to contribute to the process, to the movement, to the dynamics.
I want to pick up on your point, Tony, that more entities are setting their targets, right? So that brings a question of how greenwashed are those targets? Because it's inevitable, not everybody is going to achieve their target. That's one. Number two is that how are they going to achieve their target? So there are a number of entities who has been making a lot of announcements about investing in emerging technologies that can address some of those issues in the future. I think that is great that they're investing in the future and committing resources to make that a reality. But is that enough? So according to the shareholders of Chevron, it's not enough. It is not enough that Chevron and the energy majors have no long-term goals, do not count their scope 3 emissions, and only say that they invest in emerging technology, while, as you rightly said, a lot of the technology that is necessary to make change exists today, right? So let's address those 2 points. How much of the targets is greenwashing? How do we tell they're greenwashing? And 2, is investing in new emerging technologies enough, right? What is the more credible path to achieving net zero when we talk about technology?
All right.
Don't have to be in order. Let's just jump into it.
Let me just address greenwashing for a second. Obviously, it exists. Some would say it's rampant. Quite frankly, I'm not a greenwashing police, so I can't tell who's greenwashing and who's not, because I'm more interested in those players that are not. So I'm not focusing too much on greenwashing per se. Very very quickly you can tell in conversations and in actions whether certain individuals or corporates or investors are just just don't mean business. I think the fact that countries, corporations are actually setting their goals and targets, and they feel the pressure that they need to do that, I think it's already a great start. And the fact that now we have the US back in the Paris Agreement, now the fact that I think it's not a great piece of news, but the silver lining in the current geopolitical climate is that the only topic that the US and China seem to be able to work on or agree on is actually climate change and decarbonization. I think just shows that it is way beyond greenwashing, and what our goal is and what our role is, and I think across the board, both on the Deloitte side, both from eco-business and from Carbonless Asia, is to help build the road and create case studies and create scalable and adaptable solutions, or present adaptable and scalable solutions, whether it's technology or business model or otherwise, to the market players and stakeholders to actually achieve their decarbonization targets, even if they don't know right now how to achieve that. So quite frankly, for me, it's actually positive that the pressure is out there, and so many companies are just joining the bandwagon. Even if they are just joining the bandwagon, that doesn't matter anymore, because the movement is so strong, the momentum is so strong, they will have to act, and ultimately it will have to be policy and policy making that forces these targets to be met, and I think we are on good track for that. And let's talk about the technology later. I would like to pass Janice the mic and the opportunity to address greenwashing.
Sure. Yeah. No. A lot of strong points there, Tony, and I definitely agree. One of the things that that I guess maybe perhaps is a personal observation, because when you talk to I guess even my colleagues at EcoBusiness, we often look at the surge of press releases coming through, all of them making bold claims around net zero targets, which is all great. But of course, there's a sentiment over time that, is no longer news. If one large company made a commitment towards a 2050 target, it's no longer something we'd write a story on, because it's not even news. In fact, it's the opposite. If you within that sector are not making a target, then there's something possibly wrong with your organization. So that's great. But of course, in a sea of claims like this, how do you find the ones that actually are credible at the moment? I myself am not a police, as Tony had already said. Also, it's very difficult for us as even as specialists in this area to comb through a sustainability report or I guess one of their targets around carbon and scrutinize it and say that this was greenwash or not. The good thing, though, is at least for myself, I observe over time is when we look at the way companies had disclosed on sustainability in the past number of years, they started out also making a lot of very wishy-washy statements, very thick sustainability reports. And then over time, as policy became clearer, more directive, more targeted, quality of reporting became better, especially amongst the large companies, and then over time, the medium-sized ones. And I guess the point I'm trying to make in this is that perhaps we need to go through the journey where there is accusations of greenwashing, and perhaps media like us covering these stories about why we should not believe every single claim before there is enough pressure in the system to force companies to start to become better at their disclosure, addressing Scope 3 emissions, for example, because this whole time everyone had been reporting Scope 1, Scope 2, and we all thought that was all fine and dandy. And now suddenly, in the last 2 years or so, it became very clear that if you didn't have any Scope 3 disclosure, you are not seen as credible at all. So in order for us to get there, we kind of had to just go through that journey. So perhaps this is what we are going through at the moment before we eventually come to a point where we can accept that carbon offsets is perhaps the best solution we have right now. Let's rely on it while we sort out the issues that we have in transparency and all that before we can get to a point where hydrogen becomes a real viable and commercially viable solution. At the moment, I'm sure we all know it's very difficult to get there. We all know it is a holy grail, but that holy grail doesn't exist en masse at the moment. So we probably need to just get through it before we can get somewhere to see the light of the tunnel. I hope that was clear.
I think we try our best, right?
Yeah.
Insofar as I think also one of the things we want to always emphasize is that sustainability is not something extra. It's something inherent. If a company doesn't know how its governance is going, it shouldn't be running. If a company doesn't know the risk along its supply chain, it'll fail. And also not only fail its business, but fail its stakeholders. If a company does not care or actually monitor the social risks of its workers, of its management, of its board, of its community, then arguably that company wouldn't survive for long, because it's human beings and it's teams that build businesses, right? Not concepts, not legal structures. And it's not about a single regulator putting enforceable rules on a company, because companies are international. Carbon is international. There's no such thing as a local carbon market to fix local carbon issues, right? Because any molecule of carbon dioxide can float around in 6 days around the world, as we have seen, a lot of reports have seen, right? So the concept of carbon offset is not, I buy something to put it on my balance sheet and my sustainability report to make it look nice, but it's that it's something I have to do for good governance anyways. And for our sustainability reports to include scope 3 is to actually acknowledge we have a supply chain. Not just that we can measure whatever is happening on the electricity or whatever we control within the business, that we're dependent on the ecosystem. To ignore that is to lie to ourselves, and also I would say it's almost unacceptable, right? From a corporate accountability standpoint.
If I could just add one more point to this, Yvonne, in the way you had explained it, is I think the journey on educating the senior management around carbon is a really important one, and one that is very much underplayed. I'm sure you understand this as well. When we work with companies on their sustainability journey, when they first start up, it's usually arrowed at one person or a small little team having to disclose whatever they can find, and even the materiality is done in a slipshod sort of way. And only after they do 5 years of it do they realize, actually, we've got our material assessment completely way off, and we never even understood what our impact is on climate change. And therein lies also the problem where the board has not bought into any of this disclosure. They probably just signed off on the document without realizing what they signed off on has real implications 10, 15 years down the road. So at least for myself, I have learned that the learning journey for a huge organization, especially at the top, is severely lacking. And I'm sure for Tony, when you are investing in companies as well, these great solutions, when you talk to the CEO and the CFO about their solutions, they have to understand what implications there are before they can really sell something to you. And I think this is missing at the moment for many companies.
Yep.
Yeah.
And on that note, all I can say, Yvonne, I totally resonate with you in terms of the kind of values you highlight that are desirable, but even I guess the assumption that companies and big corporations are run in the spirit of good governance is a far-fetched one. So
you're too honest, Tony.
that is the reality.
It's reality. It's true. It's a progression, right? There's no perfect state.
I think that is not every company's holy grail or North Star. And even if we think about the proportion of the companies that are driven by that spirit or are governed accordingly, only some of them are along the journey to take carbon or sustainability first and then carbon into consideration. And when we mentioned technology, and quite frankly, when it comes to scope 3, I would like to take the blame a bit away from the C-level and the corporate stakeholders, because it is actually an incredible headache for every single corporation that is even driven by good corporate governance and want to measure scope 3. It's a huge headache, and for example, SAP and full disclosure, we are not in a business relationship, so it's not an advertisement. But SAP just came out with a supply chain carbon footprint kind of service solution just about half a year ago. As far as I'm aware, they are just rolling that out. And very few companies have the kind of data access that SAP has that can empower their clients to look into the supply chains, carbon footprint and carbon intensity. So I think, even if, and I can give another example, and without naming names there, a good friend of mine received a regional scope in Asia Pacific. It's a global company with a significant presence in Asia Pacific and China, and the company had a carbon neutral target, scope 1, 2, 3. I think beyond 2030, and they changed it for much earlier, and it became a much more aggressive target, and he became the lucky individual to deliver half of that saving that was targeted. Now, the company didn't know how to do that. He doesn't know, or didn't know how to do that, at least the last time I checked with him, but he has to do that. And he is now looking for the solutions, the services out there through which he can actually map scope 3 emissions and do something about that beyond offsetting, of course. So I think that's why when we talk about targets, they become self-fulfilling, or there's a good chance they become self-fulfilling because the pressure is there. So I'm a fan of targets, even if no one really knows what to do with it within the organization. People figure things out.
On that note, right, I think let's address some of the audience questions. So when the audience has asked, it seems sustainability is driven as a top-down approach. How do we change from a bottom-up approach? And as you said, Tony, if there's a goal, there's going to be a way that that bubbles out from the bottom of whoever has been tasked to deliver it, right? And what makes sense, the top-down versus the bottom-up? Shall we talk about it, Tunis?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because I think both have been challenging, top down, no bottom up. The top down meaning to say, as I talked about earlier, if there isn't buy-in from the top, it's very difficult for it to trickle down in an effective and correct manner. But here, if we address the bottom up approach, I assume that what we mean is customers and consumers, right? So
or even internal stakeholders, right?
Yeah, exactly. No, that's a good one too. Would the employees care enough? If we were to focus on sustainability as a topic, not carbon specifically, but sustainability, there's a news that just came out today, and some of you might have read it, about how consumers would pay more for sustainability. But why is it we're not moving the needle on things? And if we did, and actually an interesting finding found that if all the retail companies just increase their price a little bit on stuff they buy that has responsible palm oil in it, we would be able to solve the entire palm oil deforestation problem in the world. So that's massive. If they just reduce it by, say, 2%, if they increase that price by 2%, get consumers to pay more for whatever they buy, we could solve the problem on deforestation for palm oil. But why isn't that happening? I think that's very challenging because, first of all, who exactly is going to pay for that increment in price? If we talk about buying a chocolate bar, yes, we probably would pay, $5 versus $4 if we felt that it was sourced from a responsible, if there was responsible sourcing from that the cocoa that came. But if you were to buy a house, at 1.2 million versus 1 million, because it was more sustainably built, would you pay that price then? So it's not that straightforward for a consumer. That's one thing. So if we were to have that bottom-up approach, and if it just boiled down to price, I think we're simplifying too many of these issues. This is the problem. And also, I think when it comes to sustainability at the moment, we still haven't solved the problem on traceability yet. And this is just one aspect of sustainability. Is where is the sourcing coming from? Are we ensuring that the businesses are effectively decarbonizing, not sourcing too much plastic if we can, ticking all the boxes that they promised they would tick, you know, in terms of the sustainability goals before it gets to you and saying that it is really sustainable. At the moment, the language is a little bit too nuanced, and therefore we probably can't solve the problems just having a full bottom-up approach. That said, though, I have met a company that was in the rubber industry that was, they were supplying natural rubber to tire companies. And the reason why they were doing proper audits on environment sustainability was because the tire company, which is the world's largest, was being forced by BMW and Mercedes-Benz to ensure that the quality of the tire comes from natural rubber that did not have the taint of a poor supply chain, meaning to say did they pay their workers fairly? You know, did the rubber come from a place that was not deforested, irresponsibly and things like that. So there is definitely a strong top-down approach, but it's not enough. I need to reverse that. There need to be a bottom-up approach. That's definitely important, but top-down needs to definitely come as well. And the policy aspect, which Tony talked about, is very, very key. Where it's really driving change, interestingly, in the recent years has been the Sustainable Stock Exchange Initiative. Many of you know that the stock exchanges in Asia now are all starting to mandate sustainability reporting. They're starting to increase pressure by saying that over 80-90% of their investors are already demanding information around sustainability. So that means that because there's a strong investor push, stock exchanges are seeing it as a cue to get more of the issuing companies to start disclosing on sustainability, because they know it will increase their capital value as well. So that is really, really moving market. So it would really come from both ends, I would say. Sorry, a long-winded story, but I think this is important to get right.
Mm. I think it's at this point, I want to highlight the one part that Gina said, which is about traceability, right? Because every part counts along the supply chain, and that requires technology. It requires data, right? Just because you have rubber sourced from a particular location doesn't mean whoever handled the rubber throughout the agency network has done the right thing by the people that handles it, or has actually preserved the quality that it requires, and also not dealt in criminal ways on money laundering, on modern slavery, on counterfeiting, and on many, many issues that are actually very grave, right? So now I want to actually draw the attention to some of the questions we're handling, and I want to combine some of the themes, and I want to bring Tony into the conversation, right? So agriculture, right, is understood as something that is very key to the solution to climate change, because it's the biosphere, right? And there's a lot of opportunities for sequestering carbon into the soil, or if I dare say into water, right? Because the ocean is the biggest carbon sink in the world, right? So what are the scalable and realistic technology choices that you've seen recently, right? That actually, that you'll be able to give us a flavor of what are we looking at here?
I need to disappoint you, Fred, because we are not looking at agriculture and sequestration from an investment perspective, and I will give you the very good reason why. More than 75% of the carbon footprint of the world, and that applies to Asia as well to a similar extent, is related to energy and related to the built environment and mobility. So we are looking at CO2 emissions reductions through an urban lens. And when it comes to an urban lens, these are the three areas that we are mainly looking at. It doesn't mean that there are no great opportunities and agriculture doesn't need to be addressed. And I think when it comes to sequestration, it's extremely important. Ocean sink, very important. But where we feel we can add the most value is through the areas that I just highlighted. So I would be kind of going beyond my realm if I advocated specifically for for some of the interesting agricultural and forest related company solutions. There are great work being done, or there's great work being done by the likes of Rabobank around the world. There's a carbon bank initiative from them in particular. They're also doing something in collaboration with Microsoft that enables smallholder farmers to turn their land into carbon banks and help them trade and generate additional revenue. So beyond technology, we see business model innovation, and quite frankly, when it comes to agriculture and forestry, I believe the business model innovation is the most interesting. But quite frankly, when it comes to emissions reduction, and very similarly for when it comes to exotic technologies such as direct air capture, right? It's out there. Elon Musk is sponsoring the X Prize with $100 million to identify the most impressive direct air capture solutions, which is important, great, but right now there are no business models that would enable such technologies to fly. You truly need carbon tax, carbon credits to make this work right now. And we feel that from our perspective, when it's about to when we define our role to bring as much private capital into decarbonizing technologies, it needs to be, and they need to be lower hanging fruit type solutions. And quite frankly, the energy transition as a story, as a narrative, as a process is in our face. It addresses and relates to everything, not only in an urban system, but on a humanity scale. And we define, obviously, our focus around energy, built environment, and mobility. But when we talk about mobility, that's also energy related, right? Because we expect from EVs to bring great carbon emission reductions, but they only bring it as long as the energy source is clean and sustainable. The same applies to buildings. Much of the building's carbon footprint is related to energy, electricity, especially in places like Singapore or Hong Kong, and that relates to energy efficiency and the source of the energy itself. So it goes back to energy a lot, how it's generated, how it's distributed, how it's then used, what it's then used for, and quite frankly, the amount of capital we are about to, and the type of capital we are about to mobilize, we need to generate a kind of ROIs with them through really straightforward business models to be able to catalyze more capital flow into these technologies that are tangible and highly measurable. And quite frankly, when it comes to the more exotic direct air capture type solutions, we like them a lot. We would like to support those. We love the science. It is just a more high risk type investment at the moment. And there's a very good reason why I believe Elon Musk, Amazon with their climate fund, Microsoft with their climate fund are actually going into these areas or focusing on this area because they are not investing specifically with the expectation of a return. It is part of a CSR. It is part of the CSR initiative and policy. It is part of a commitment to catalyze that space. But that's exactly the kind of, from my perspective, more venture philanthropy type of capital that this space needs than scaled venture capital at this point. Once again, we are just focusing on the low-hanging fruit. I hope this gave a bit of a flavor. I can list a couple of interesting companies as well if that's of interest, but I think we are running out of time and we might have a lot of interesting questions.
we're getting flooded with interesting questions. So there are a lot of questions right now being flooded in, and I'm trying to address some of them by text, and some of our panelists will be addressing esoteric questions by text. Now, there are some themes emerging about the business end of carbon, right? So there is a particularly, I think, poignant question about boards and companies jumping on board with carbon reduction declaration, right? But insofar as understanding what is realistic, right, and also how to make business decisions, especially around folks that don't have direct experience in origination, what are the advices we can give them, right? Because everybody wants to jump on the back of a good business model so they can receive rather than pay for liabilities they need to reduce. So on that point, Junice, are you still able to address some of the points? I think she might be having connection issues. Or maybe Tony and we should just fire it out until she's able to read.
Yeah. Sorry, can you repeat the last bit of your question?
All right. So
I was reading another question.
So many, right? All right. So the carbon reduction declarations, right? You and I talked about it. For the urban reduction, it's all about energy, right? And for agriculture and all that, there are a lot of issues attached to it, because we have to solve problems that we can right now and leave room for unsolvable problems to find pathways, right? So now addressing the question that was asked by Ging Ong, right? There are too many balls jumping on the carbon, that question I'm talking about here?
Yeah, there are too many boards jumping on their carbon reductions, yeah.
Yeah, and they actually don't really understand what does it really mean, right? So in terms of, what is realistic in terms of the technology, right? Most carbon sequestration projects have never gone to commercialization around the world successfully, ever. They are mostly money-losing projects because, one, the commercial model is not there. Two, carbon price as an important revenue source needs to be more than $100 per metric ton to perpetuity from day one of the project planning, before the project even kicks in, to make the project commercially viable without government subsidy, right? And then most people don't know that unless they're the people like us that play around with this all the time, right? So what are the reality bites we can serve, on the commercial end of all these technologies and projects? Let's just drop the truth bombs.
Yeah, I think you actually explained, my point almost, better and with very succinctly why we are actually looking at urbanization in cities and the three areas that I mentioned. To the point within the question that I see an issue, and I tend to agree with Ginkit Ong that there are a lot of people with not the right level of depth and understanding jumping on board to try to help, which ultimately is not help. So I think education, once again, that Junice highlighted before, policy will be all very important and relevant. And when it comes to policy, transparency and real measurement of CO2 emission reduction will be the key here. Because if a consultant comes on board and convinces a board or C-level decision-making party stakeholder to jump on a project, and it is actually not providing any measurable outcome, which should be governed by policy, which should be expected by policy, required by policy, then they will be fired very, very soon after. So I hope that the systems that are coming in place and should be coming in place will filter the laymen's and the charlatans from the real professionals.
Yeah, thank you. Alrighty, so we have a question following this, right? So the built environment's contribution to net zero, this is a debate about whether there's less carbon or renewable energy, green. How much of that is really, from your perspective, making a huge difference right now?
Within the 75% that is energy dedicated or related to energy, about 1/3 of that is related to the built environment. And depending on various geographies, obviously air conditioning, chilling, energy efficiency across the board is a huge component, but also embedded carbon. Also the construction industry is hugely inefficient. Beyond polluting also comes with a huge carbon footprint. So the three sub areas, property, new materials, energy efficiencies, plus construction, these are four, are all significant and need to be addressed in the context of built environment.
Yeah, okay. So I'd like to welcome Jonas back, right? We have some questions about EV and also green energy, right? And I wanted to also bring the topic back. I think a lot of times we look at green just simply as green, right? There's actually a spectrum of issues surrounding it. We know that renewable energy is not continuous. It's not sufficient enough to actually power all the devices and all the use cases. And the storage cost in the transportation is completely different, right? So now we can green something and make it stop working, or we can keep it working, but gradually transition part of it from brown to green, right? So from your perspective, Jonas, what are some of the things that you're seeing on this trend, of green to brown or completely green, even though we might have blackouts, or that the cost might be prohibitive. So many things that's not really talked about, right?
Yeah, can you hear me, by the way?
I can hear you now. You dropped off a little bit, but I'm very happy you're back now.
Okay, sure. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer to this. It's a good question because they say that all roads lead to Rome, right? So, but I do think that from my experience working with power utility companies, with even palm oil and real estate, the problem is that if you continue business as usual, meaning to say you want to achieve your sustainability targets by doing what you've sort of been doing, maybe just changing a little bit on operations, you're not going to make your targets, especially if the targets are robust enough. This is also why sustainability innovation is such a key component today when it comes to the decarbonization journey, right? Is that so many companies realize that if I were to just keep it as it is, I'm not going to transition enough to meet my targets. So that would mean that I can't even go from, you certainly can't go to green directly, but you can't even get from brown to green. So this is the challenge that a lot of them are facing. Maybe what's really important is to take a step back and to really understand what your current disclosure is at the moment. I think that's really key. And I'm sorry that I might sound like I'm sort of a broken record going on about this, but it's really important that companies really know how to measure their current impact at the moment. And so far, when you look at the sea of companies, even though you see a lot of them disclosing, the understanding of what their carbon currently is, especially on the supply chain, is still so far and few and far between. We talked about scope 3, and that's really refreshing, but that only came along in the last 2 years or so, which means that a wide range of companies across most of the sectors haven't really understood their suppliers' carbon at the moment. But this is also driving the movement, which means that in Asia, if you are an Asian-based company supplying to a large multinational in Europe or in the US, chances are, if you want to be part of their procurement process, you would have to disclose correctly on your carbon in order for them to capture it correctly on their scope 3. So this process alone might sound really straightforward, but it isn't. And this is why we need to get that part right before we get on to transitioning into green. Then, of course, it's sourcing more and more things that doesn't rely on petroleum, doesn't rely on the traditional oil and gas sector. Can we find a way to reduce waste, increase circularity, so that we are able to obviously reduce our impact on, say, a product life cycle assessment? That part is really key as well. I think in order for us to really understand that, we really need to understand our suppliers before we get there. So again, I hope I'm answering your question, but I know I'm not giving you a straightforward answer, because the truth is it's a pretty challenging journey. Yeah. And maybe one more point to make, perhaps, in that is conscious of time, is energy efficiency. I think a lot of us want to get into, doing really great stuff around renewables, investing in great clean tech solutions, without thinking that actually the most important thing a lot of them tell you, especially in the built environment space, is first find ways to increase your energy efficiency. The simple stuff, lighting, finding ways to cool, stuff like that, ventilation, proper ventilation. All of these things are actually very, very straightforward solutions that many companies are not applying at the moment.
Combination of windows, right?
Yeah.
Just put that bloody UV film on and you're cool.
Exactly.
Yes,
Exactly.
exactly. Yeah. Okay, cool. Conscious of time, I've got two questions. One from Adam, our co-host today, and also another from the anonymous attendee here addressing money, right? So a lot of money has been thrown into investing, into allocating capital, into the whole sustainability topic. So Adam has rightly pointed out, 1.8 billion, right, from Singapore government, and then the funds directed into ESG themes, 10x just in Singapore, and globally we can see so much more, right? Well, what are the indicators that actually can show whether we're moving the needle or not? And also to Junius's point, right? Well, were we thinking about the economic paradigm too much in the more, without actually thinking about, well, do we actually need to calibrate and take things a step back and do something simpler, right? So let's talk about the money side, right? So much money, so many undertakings. How do we know we're making the needle move at all?
Let me just say, I have so much to say now as you've been presenting the question this way. I think the 10x is good, but it is Singapore, and Singapore is leading in many perspectives in the region, in the world. Not too many cities in the world has an institution such as Temasek, and even if they do, they don't join forces with an institutional investor such as BlackRock to set up a $600 million decarbonization partnership type investment fund. Do we think this is a lot? If every single city had this type of fund in Asia Pacific, we could say this is a bubble. This is the only city that has this type of fund and funding and partnership and strategy available right now. So no, I don't think it's too much. I think it's just amazing to see how fast and how committedly Singapore itself is moving ahead on this front. There is very obviously a couple of trillion US dollars, depending on the report and research you're looking at, there's a couple of trillion US dollars of funding gap to get to net zero, and we need this much money. So the 10x I think is around the right figure to move the needle, because we need to move the needle that much. Now the good news here is that we don't need to raise the 2-3 trillion US dollars per year from new sources. This capital is actually already being invested. Our goal and our role here is to reallocate the already invested or already allocated capital that is being invested in infrastructure or energy generation, one way or another. Our role is to channel that and reallocate that to decarbonizing or carbon emission reduction resulting technologies, projects, and solutions. I'm very positive that we are going to be on the right track, with China committing to its 2060 target, Japan, South Korea. If you look at just these markets, it's almost 50% of the world's CO2 emissions, and China does mean business. So it will be great. I'm very positive and happy. I don't think the money is yet too much. I know where Adam is coming from. I know where you're coming from, Adam. It could become a bubble. It could distort valuations and prices, but I think we are far from that right now.
Okay, we are really running close to the end. So, with the last 3 minutes, I wanted to actually recap, right? So we went through a lot of topics today, And I think, you know, we're sharing some realistic expectations, but also going down to the basics, right? We wouldn't know how to fix the problem unless we know what the problem is. That goes to disclosure, that goes to quantification, that goes to finding things, right, that companies in this board and its management should be responsible for. And then we also referred to some of the realities of what the money should be going to, what are the observations we've seen, right, in the marketplaces. And, you know, if I can just pass the mic to Jonas and Tony, you know, with some, I hope, uplifting and inspirational comments, not always positive, but I think food for thought for folks to continue this conversation when they go back to their circles, to make sure that, you know, the voices are heard and the fight continues in a good way. Yeah.
Okay, I'll go first then, and Tony can have the last word today. So I think just very short as I can. We're part of a really big movement, and there is no slowing down. Every time I talk to someone who is who's really interested in ESG, I think they really see it with purpose that this is really going far. If we can boil it down to one thing, which is carbon, then let it be carbon. If the next thing is water, then let it be water. At the moment, though, we have a very, very urgent mission right here, and really it is to just ensure that whatever we say we do, it happens in practice. So don't give up. We all are part of this, and that collective movement really does work if we all believe in one same thing. So yeah, Tony, over to you.
I love that. It will be very difficult to top that closing remark. It's as optimistic as I am. I do believe, and I like to position decarbonizing technologies and the carbon opportunity when it comes to venture capital type or private investments as the biggest investment opportunity of this decade. And I'm not alone thinking this way. Increasing number of people, institutional investors think alike. So I would like to encourage, if in the audience there are entrepreneurs, startups, this is just a great place to be right now. The capital and the attention, the resources, the various programs will be coming. You are already on the platform, since you're watching this panel, with organizations such as Level 3, Eco-Business and Deloitte and Carbonless Asia, that are all here for you to help scale and make a difference. So, and this is just the beginning. I'm 100% sure about that. So power to us, and to you, Adam.
Renewable power also.
Love it.
Let me not have the final word, but I'd just like to thank Yvonne, Tony, and Jonas for being with us this afternoon. Jonas, I like you picking up on the Beatles. Let it be carbon, let it be water, whatever, but you know, let it be. And Tony, I think focusing, it is an amazing time. The opportunities are extraordinary, and it is about innovation. Sustainability is innovation. If you don't innovate, you're not sustainable. If you're not sustainable, you're not innovating. So that's what we all need to be doing. So thank you all for joining Level 3 this afternoon. Big thanks to you, Yvonne, for moderating so well, and for Deloitte for being our partner in this great series. And yes, let's keep the conversation going. Let's keep it on the level here at Level 3. Thank you very much for joining us, and look forward to seeing you all soon. Bye for now.
Thank you. Thanks, Adam.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Yvonne.